Heretofore they were anti-Christian kingdoms, quote, of one mind, to give their strength and power to the beast, unquote. The church is represented as rejoicing in this astonishing change. She has indeed cause of joy, quote, since the captivity of Judah about 588 years before the Christian era, until the present day, scarcely an instance has occurred in the whole history of nations, of a kingdom or commonwealth, regulating their polity upon purely scriptural principles. Many nations, it is true, have pretended to be Christian, and religion has been scandalized by their unholy interference. Many Christians have also been deceived and misled into a belief that the kingdoms of the nation were so constituted as to merit their conscientious acquiescence and pious support. But the Prince of the kings of the earth, who gave this revelation to his servant John, teaches us that now, for the first time, the kingdoms of this world are become the kingdoms of God and of Christ. Heretofore they have been thrones of iniquity, having no fellowship with God. Psalm 94, verse 20. Characterized as beasts and horns of beasts, both by Daniel and the writer of the Apocalypse. Servants and admirers and apologists and eulogists they have had in abundance, but there was not a voice in heaven raised in their commendation. They were to be feared, but not approved by the saints of the Most High. That from Dr. MacLeod, pages 192 and 193. How then, it may ask, shall the church justify her professed allegiance to Christ while she contracts alliances with rulers that are in a state of rebellion against him, who offer him no vows of allegiance, who refuse to yield to the demands of his law, who instead of recognizing his rightful supremacy, impiously lay claim to that supremacy for themselves, and presumptuously intrude, like Korah, into the precincts of the tabernacle? Shall the followers of the Lamb be guiltless when they tender to such rulers their oaths of allegiance, when they support and encourage them in their impious enterprises, and offer up prayers to God for the perpetuity of their government and the stability of their thrones? Is it the Pharaohs or the Herods or the Neros of modern times in whom the Church of Christ may hope to see verified the faithful promise, quote, that kings shall be her nursing fathers and their queens her nursing mothers, unquote? Thirdly, an alliance between the Church and an immoral civil government has a tendency to suppress a faithful testimony against the sinful policy of civil rulers. The world is in a state of alienation from God, and the plan of his providence and the honor of his government require that explicit and faithful testimony be borne against abounding iniquity. And as God is more dishonored by the disobedience and impiety of public bodies than by the sins of individuals, it is of peculiar consequence that public iniquities be exposed and condemned. But can it reasonably be expected that this momentous duty will be performed with any fidelity by a church in alliance with an ungodly state? The fact that she has contracted such an alliance, even if it did not prevent, must in a great degree neutralize her testimony against the evil that is in it. But it is a matter of certainty that the existence of such an alliance will have the effect of preventing a faithful testimony from being given. To expect that any large number of men who are dependent on the absolute will of unprincipled civil rulers for the whole, or a chief part of their support, and the support of their families, should continue resolutely to expose and testify against the iniquitous policy of these rulers, would be contrary to every sound view of fallen humanity, as well as to experience. It is altogether romantic. Individuals may be found even in these disadvantageous circumstances, whose strong sense of duty and zeal for the glory of their Lord will raise them above all selfish considerations and lead them to administer pointed and seasonable reproof to noble or even royal transgressors. But it would be madness to expect that all ministers should equal the zeal and intrepidity of Elijah and John the Baptist of ancient times, or of Knox and Melville of a more recent period. It is proverbial that princes seldom hear the truth, and least of all are they likely to hear it from those who are either in expectation or possession of favors which may be revoked at pleasure. What infinite evil might have been prevented in the conduct of civil rulers had the Church and her ministers been faithful to their trust? How many unrighteous and disastrous wars might have been arrested at the outset, had the impolicy and injustice of these wars been distinctly set before civil rulers by the ambassadors of the Prince of Peace? Where there has been one Micaiah to proclaim unwelcome truth in the king's ear, There have been hundreds of flattering prophets to raise the shout, quote, "Go up to Ramoth Gilead and prosper, for the Lord shall deliver it into the king's hand." What an astonishing and humiliating spectacle has been exhibited when Protestant nations have been slaughtering each other in the field of battle, storming each other's cities and sinking each other's ships in the deep, and all the while the gospel ministry in the contending nations have been multiplying contradictory prayers on both sides, beseeching the Most High to bless and prosper their righteous cause. How many unholy alliances might have been prevented had the Church and her ministers respectfully but firmly represented to civil rulers the guilt and danger of confederacies with the enemies of God. Such representations are not always unsuccessful. Even a rash and headstrong king of Judah was arrested in his course by the warning of a single messenger. Quote, "There came a man of God to Amaziah, saying, O king, let not the army of Israel go with thee, for the Lord is not with Israel. But if thou wilt go, do it. Be strong for the battle. God shall make thee fall before the enemy, for God hath power to help and to cast down." 2 Chronicles 25, verses 7 and 8. How much tyranny and oppression might have been prevented or greatly mitigated had the ministers of religion been faithful in tendering to civil rulers sound and seasonable advice. But alas, they have commonly had more of the character of courtiers than of judicious and faithful counselors. They have too often given an ambitious and arbitrary rulers such counsel as the young men gave to Rehoboam, quote, "My father did lade you with a heavy yoke. I will add to your yoke. My father hath chastised you with whips, but I will chastise you with scorpions," unquote. In all ages and countries, ambitious ecclesiastics have been the sternest enemies of rational liberty. Whatever may have been the sufferings or complaints of the people, a pampered and time-serving clergy have been foremost to reproach them as insolent and to silence their murmurs by a perverted application of Holy Writ, quote, "Let every soul be subject unto the higher powers, for there is no power but of God. The powers that be are ordained of God. Whosoever therefore resisteth the power resisteth the ordinance of God, and they that resist shall receive to themselves damnation," unquote. As if the Scriptures gave sanction to oppression while they absolutely prohibited all efforts to obtain deliverance or redress. To what extent this line of conduct and this strain of doctrine on the part of churchmen have had the effect of implanting in the breasts of an oppressed and suffering people a deep-seated hatred and hostility, not only to civil government, but also to the Church and the Bible, the day of judgment will alone disclose. Under the worst reigns and the worst oppressors, the clergy have been almost invariably the abettors of tyranny, and although a Pilate and a Henry and a Charles might not perhaps have been less ungodly, they certainly would have been less cruel and sanguinary had there not been a Caiaphas and a Wolsey and a Laud and a Sharp to counsel and stimulate them in persecution. Fourthly, such a union as we are contending against never fails to bring a church into bondage. Let it be recollected that we speak of a government in the hands of men devoid of piety, in whom the fear and love of God are not the master principles, and with whom the advancement of the kingdom of Christ and the salvation of immortal souls cannot possibly be the chief ends. It is a moral certainty that such men cannot love the Church on account of her intrinsic worth, or feel any sympathy with her to the great objects she labors to accomplish. On the contrary, a Church that is faithful to her Supreme Lord, and which displays the beauty of holiness, must inevitably be an object of their dislike. By a necessity of nature, they must desire to see the Church less holy, less pure, less faithful, and uncompromising than the law of Christ requires her to be, and unless they can succeed in divesting her of those attributes which the carnal mind abhors, she must be an object of increasing aversion. If such men shall choose to make an alliance with her, their object in doing so must be a worldly or political object. It cannot possibly be their aim that the Church should contribute to render men religious, excepting insofar as religion may be tolerated by an unconverted world. But there is nothing on earth which the world can less tolerate than true religion. Quote, "The friendship of the world is enmity with God," unquote, and the faithful followers of the Lamb may expect to be hated for his name's sake.